So now we're live and recording. So Weimar Republic, you don't need to know that much about the Weimar Republic, but we are going to talk about the transition from government. Germany is losing World War I. 1918, that is clear, that Germany is about to lose the First World War. And there are two key figures basically running Germany at that point. A guy by the name of Ludendorff and Paul von Hindenburg. Okay, General Ludendorff and Paul von Hindenburg. Okay? Paul. Ludendorff, I can't remember. Drawing a complete blank. I only refer to Ludendorff all the time. So
No, that's not.
Ludendorff, yeah. Ludendorff. Paul von Hindenburg. Okay. Now they tell the Kaiser, Germany's king, that we're going to lose the war, and if we don't give up now, we're going to be invaded, and the war is going to actually occur on German soil. The whole of World War I, no fighting actually occurred on German soil. The 2.5 million Germans, by the end of the war, were starving to death, were freezing to death because of the lack of supply. Ludendorff organizes what's called the October Reforms. He tries to reform the government to make it more democratic, thinking that if Germany became willingly more democratic, that the Allies would be easier on them. Make sense? October Reforms, yep. At the end of October, the German Navy mutinies because they're absolutely panicked at the idea that they're going to be sent on a suicide mission. So they mutiny, they revolt, they refuse to follow any orders. And the mutiny spreads. It starts in Wilhelmshaven, and it spreads to a city called Kiel. I think the orders are wrong. That much. Just showing you very good. That begins a full-scale sort of revolution in Germany in November that's referred to as the November Revolution. It becomes clear that the German public are not happy that the reforms are enough. They want heads to roll. Because it's not until the beginning of November that the German public have any idea that Germany is about to lose the war. They thought they were still winning. And so when they realize suddenly the war is nearly lost, they go crazy. Workers go on strike, the rebellion spreads. By the first week in November, the Kaiser is forced to abdicate his throne. Completely, that it's the end of the German monarchy. He runs away to Norway, where he happily lives ever. Germany no longer has a government. Enter the Weimar Republic, the democratic republic that is created in the wake of that chaos. Now, it's called the Weimar Republic because they couldn't organize that government in Berlin. There was too much violence going on in Berlin. Essentially, revolts going on at that time. So they couldn't safely organize the government in Berlin. They had to go to the city of Weimar. Weimar. It wasn't run from Weimar the entire time. They did eventually. Now, the guy who organizes the October Reforms, again, give you the background here, is Ludendorff. And he does it for a couple of reasons. One, in the hopes to get easier terms in the surrender. That the Allies might, oh, you're democratic now, so we'll take it easy. In part because it's one of the conditions that Americans have made we thought surrender should look like. French one of them. The other reason that Ludendorff wanted the October reforms was so that he could blame the loss of the First World War on a different government. It's not the Kaiserreich that lost the First World War. It's this new democratic government that signed the treaty and lost the war. He created something that becomes known as the myth of the stab in the back, and this you need to know. Okay? The myth of the stab in the back. This is the idea that it's key members of the new government that undermined the army and lost the war. That it wasn't the military that lost the war. No, no, no. We were stabbed in the back by the new government. Yeah. The myth of the stab in the back is the idea that the new government gave up on the military and lost the First World War. The myth of the stab in the back is taken further because, then it's blamed on who, specifically, which ethnic group. It's Jews that stabbed the army in the back! Because it's a Jewish man who actually ended up signing the Treaty of Versailles for Germany. And there were a couple of other key statements. So it's a nice, easy way to blame that. The reality is the war was lost. Unequivocally. The stab in the back is no crap. Ludendorff managed to sell, and Hitler ran with, and sold to the German people. Not true at all. In fact, it was Ludendorff himself. This is the genius in his political maneuvering. It was Ludendorff himself who told the Kaiser the war was lost. He said, but not me. This is a move like, you're in a bar and you punch a big guy in the face and you punch your friend. And it's sort of what Ludendorff is doing. And it works. And the stab in the back, the myth of the stab in the back, has largely done what people buy into the belief that the Jews who undermined the military actually going to kill them. And we could take a detailed look at the Treaty of Versailles, okay, and the conditions it places on Germany. But again, there's not that much that we need to look at here. Only really a couple of points. The biggest one, the war guilt clause. Article 231 of the Treaty of Versailles is the war guilt clause. The war guilt clause. The Article of Versailles. Ending the First World War. 30. The actual armistice was December. Um, when the French surrendered in World War II, Hitler made some armistice. Yes. Oh, it's a big screw. Okay, Article 231 is the War Guilt Clause. It forces Germany to accept sole responsibility for the First World War. You know, it's what Austria-Hungary is Hitler's fault. They accept the whole of the war. There were also, and we will talk about them in more detail later. There were also some restrictions placed on the military. Military was limited to 100,000 men. They were not allowed an air force of any kind. And they had to give up land. Space in the land. Very tough bet. No air force. Navy was limited, I think it was six. Not much. And of course, the biggest issue, which wasn't officially determined until I think 1921, was reparations, war reparations. And I believe the final amount was somewhere in the neighborhood of 6.6 billion. The Young plan said it should have been paid back in the late 80s, I think. But then World War II out of the middle, what happens to do after that? But yeah, technically, one of these very easy. It was March, I believe. Bear in mind, though, it's 1919, 6.6 billion. That's a lot of money. Okay, in today's terms, probably put that in billions.
Who was that one to go to? Various countries? Or?
Yeah, mostly to France, mostly yeah. France and Belgium. Okay, and here's where I'm going to order you to stop writing. Okay, because if you're writing this, we'll never get through. So if we look at what the Weimar Republic looks like in 1919, let's get started. There we are. Before the First World War, Germany had been a proud nation with a strong army, an overseas empire, and a powerful industry. The war destroyed that old Germany. A revolution in 1918, which we talked about, the Kaiser abdicated and fled the country. And in 1919, the Germans elected a new president, a guy by the name of Frederick Ebert. And he faced a massive challenge. Okay? This is Ebert. There he is. Good-looking guy. Very bohemian look. Now, Ebert is a member of the SPD. Okay? You do need to know the SPD. We'll talk about this a lot. The SPD is the German Social Democratic Party. The initials are in German. The German Social Democratic Party. Socialist Party. Good news for Ebert is Germany is now a democratic republic, which he has always wanted. That's what the SPD always wanted. They're socialists, but they wanted a democratic government. We'll look at the other parties that were around in a minute. No, I'll write this down. But you lead the Socialist Party, which is now the most popular party in Germany. Socialist Party, who do they represent? Who's in? Yeah, the workers, working class, the largest portion of the population. Now, under the Kaiser in Germany, the Reichstag existed. The Reichstag is like your House of Commons. It existed, and people had the right to vote, even working class. But how much your vote counted for depended on how much tax you paid. So if you were rich, your vote could count for as many as 1,000 times the vote of a member of the working class. That seems fair? Not so much. And it made sure that even though the SPD was constantly getting the most votes and the most popular party, they were getting very few seats in the Reichstag. So they didn't actually have that. Now that it's a true democracy, that's gone. SPD rules. He's the president of the new republic. Not bad for an ordinary working guy, right? The problem. Now it looks sad. We'll zoom in on these. Germany lost the war, but the German people don't actually believe that they've lost the war. Because the propaganda machine in Germany was at full tilt the entire time, convincing people that the war was going really well. Since the war wasn't taking place on German soil, people believed it. We're winning! And in fact, in 1917, we'd thrown Russia out of the war. Okay? Forget the fact that they had an internal revolution which actually caused them to drop out of the war. But they also lost 8 million soldiers, more than all other nations combined. They didn't have bullets. Different story altogether. And once Russia dropped out of the war, Germany almost tripled in size. Because the treaty they signed with Russia, the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, forced Russia to give up a large chunk of their European land. Unfortunately, that happened at the same time the Americans joined the war. So, didn't really win. So the Americans hit the Western Front, and the war did. Right? With fresh soldiers and new influx of refugees. So Germany loses it very quickly. The German people don't understand that. Okay? So he's got to break the news. It's shoot the messenger time, because he has to give them the reality check of actually, you know what? We weren't winning, and we haven't won. And I'm your new president. The German economy is an absolute disaster. The state has internal debts of 150 billion marks because of the war. Plus, you can't afford to pay the war pensions to 600,000 families whose fathers or sons have been killed in the war. People are starving to death. By the end of the war, 2.5 million Germans either starved or froze to death because of food and gas and coal shortages. Because everything had been directed toward the border. And the British blockade meant that 25% of German foods, which were traditionally imported, were no longer available. So operating on only 75% of the stuff that they needed, right? They were trying to fuel a war effort, so people were starving. Germany's more divided than ever. New government comes into power, and all of these extreme political parties that during the war just kind of settled into the background, because when we're at war, people unify, right? The parties stop, for lack of a better way to put it. they stop fighting. As soon as the war is over and it's lost and the government's in tatters, everybody who's anybody thinks that, well, now is the time for revolution. So now is the time for us to push power. So he's got to deal with all of those revolts, and we'll go through them. But some wealthy industrialists got rich from the war. Poor families, though, had to sell their possessions just to buy food. Most Germans have no understanding of how democracy works. They never experienced a real democracy. And the Kaiser used to just make the decisions and do whatever he wanted. So no one today knows what it's like to ask ordinary Germans how they want their country to be run. But we've also got the issue that Berlin is dangerous. Right? Armed gangs of former soldiers are fighting in the streets with police, troops, and each other. Many of these gangs totally opposed to democracy. Berlin is so dangerous, the Weimar Republic couldn't even start in the capital city. Okay? One of the major issues is you have a massive army left over from World War I, but the Treaty of Versailles says you can only continue to employ 100,000. What are ex-soldiers really good at doing? They're skilled at killing people. The same issue we had with the Soviet Union. Take a massive secret police agency, it's called the KGB, and you disband them. And what do? They form the Russian mafia. And they now run the nation. Okay? Because they're secret agents. Their jobs for years, their training was to kill people and spy. What do you do when you're out of work in that line of work? You don't go work at McDonald's. They find other things to do. German military, same thing. They join the Free Corps. And Ebert right away has to deal with what do you do with all of these ex-soldiers that feel betrayed in the loss of the war. That they just fought for 4 years for nothing. So from 1919 to 1923, the Weimar Republic has to deal with a series of challenges. Challenge one is setting up a democratic government. So they get a new system of government, and the rules for it set out in the Weimar Constitution. They keep the Reichstag, Parliament stays largely the same. Here are the key points from the Constitution. Okay? All men and women over 20 can vote in elections. That's good. Every person's vote counts because of proportional representation. I'll explain to you what proportional representation is because it's the greatest weakness of the Weimar Republic. Proportional representation means that if a political party is 10% of the total vote, they get 10% of the seats in the Reichstag. That sounds really fair, doesn't it? The issue with proportional representation is that what if there are hundreds of parties? I could start a Mark Tinney party, get a couple hundred people to vote for me, and I suddenly have a seat on the Reichstag. Woohoo! Which means actually that if you've got so many little parties in the Reichstag, you never have a single party in charge. You ever heard the expression, too many chefs in the kitchen? That's exactly what the Weimar Republic is all the time. Okay? There's never one single party in charge. What's the problem with this current government? You essentially have two wings. Like the Dems and David Cameron, the Conservative Party. They don't get along very well, nor should they, given their political beliefs. The government would have disbanded a long time ago if Nick hadn't given up on most of these police and just said, oh, well, let the police do whatever they want. Right? It's a government that's doomed to fail. So is the Weimar government. Day-to-day government will be the job of the chancellor. He's the leader of the biggest single party. So whichever is the largest party in the Reichstag, even if they don't have more than 50%, their leader is the chancellor. The head of state is the president, who's elected. The key point there is Article 48. Weimar Constitution. Two things that you need to know. One is that it has proportional representation, which means that you have loads of little parties involved. The second one is Article 48. Article 48 is basically allows the president to rule by decree for a short period of time. This means that the president can make laws without the Reichstag by using the powers of Article 48. If the Reichstag breaks down, the president can step in and get things done. It was, in the end, a very democratic constitution. But all of these people, which I will often refer to as the traditional elite, military leaders, civil servants, big business owners, big landowners, okay? These are the traditional elite. They didn't like a democratic government because it takes power away from them. Because the military used to run Germany. The Kaiser loved the military, and he did, mostly, whatever major military leaders told him to. Suddenly the military doesn't have that kind of pull, and they're unhappy. Makes sense. Big business don't like the new government because it gives too much power to poor people. With the rise of trade unions. And we have a socialist government in charge. Of course they don't like it. Because the socialist government is going to put in regulations on employment. They're going to bring in a shorter work day. They're going to bring in a minimum wage. They're going to make sure we have to pay pensions, stuff like that. Workers don't want to, employers don't want to pay that stuff. So it's largely the upper middle and upper class that don't like it. Actually, that's the military. They longed for the good old days when the Kaiser ruled Germany. And they wanted to do whatever they could to undermine the government. So right from the outset, the Weimar Republic is facing a number of challenges. That's the first one. The second challenge is what historians refer to the threat from the left and the right. Which party's in charge? Which is the biggest party in the government? Remember? What did we say? Socialist Democratic Party. It's a left-wing party. The problem is, there's a more extreme left-wing party. What's more extreme than socialists? Communists. Fascist right-wing. Very extreme right-wing. The Nazis. So first we have the left wing. Communists wanted Germany to have a communist revolution, like the one in Russia. completely, let's kill off all the rich people. Murder, it's very, it's got to be a violent. Kill them. Take all their money. Split it up. Would that be okay? We'll just kill off Richard Branson and take the money. That's the idea. Okay? They wanted a full revolution. They wanted workers to take over factories, farms, and the government. They're headed by a guy by the name, you won't need to remember this, of Karl Liebknecht, Rosa Luxemburg. And in 1919, they initiate the Spartacist revolt. Maybe he's on the next point here. Hold on. Yeah, there we are. In January 1919, the communists start a revolution, or try to, called the Spartacist revolt. Okay? Ebert asked his opponents on the right to deal with the opponents on the left. He signed something called the Ebert-Groener Agreement with military leaders. They basically agreed not to fully disband current military leadership as long as they help him overthrow and deal with kind of the threats from extremist groups. So, a group called the Free Corps, ex-military, put down the Spartacist revolt with extreme prejudice. They kill everyone, including Karl and Rosa. Okay? Mostly execution style. Okay? They give up, and they still get shot back in there. Little trial, nothing. Does that bode well for a new democratic government? Not exactly the best way to start. Okay? Let's not give them trial or any punishment. Okay? So, he's trying, you can see, to play an impossible balancing act, okay, between former military leaders and left-wing groups. He's got to have the military on his side to some extent, otherwise he has no way of getting the government. Does that make sense? Okay. But it's sort of, dealing with the devil a little bit. He's also got a threat, of course, from the extreme right. The Free Corps, who put down the Spartacist revolt, were ex-soldiers who wanted Germany to be run by the army. Like it used to be. They hated the communists, but they didn't like democracy that much either. There should be a point here, yeah. In March 1920, after having put down the Spartacist revolt to help out the democratic government, they start their own revolt. In March 1920, the Free Corps leader Wolfgang Kapp tries to take over Berlin. And he's successful in doing so. They actually completely take over the city of Berlin. Okay, it's called the Kapp Push. Again, we have another extremist group trying to overthrow the current government. That's not even a year old yet. This time, Ebert makes a very smart move, really. He appeals to the working class. The working class like him? Do you? He's socialist. He represents the working class. But these are people who would have voted for him. So he appeals to the working class. He asks them to go on strike. So all the workers of Berlin, large numbers of them, go on strike. Refuse collection stops. Power shuts down. Transport links shut down. The city grinds to a halt. Only a couple of key functions you need to shut down in order to get what you want. Stop refuse collection in a major city, Won't take long. Once the stink reaches Parliament, they went on strike to show their opposition to cap. Berlin's roads, railways, power, water, and sewage services all brought to a standstill. Cap's forced to give up and he flees. What do you think? Is Ebert doing a pretty good job dealing with both those extreme sides? Well, I'm kind of impressed with how he's playing a very delicate balancing act. But the reality is, by having to make an agreement with the military, traditional elites maintain power in Germany more than he would have liked, I'm quite sure. Right? So the actual change in government isn't as big a change as it perhaps could have been or should have been. Because traditional elites still maintain a lot of power because Ebert's in position. Challenge 3. Coping with the Treaty of Versailles. When you look at the overall impact of the Treaty of Versailles, Germans had to accept blame for starting the war guilt clause, right? Lost 10% of its land, 12.5% of its population, and 6.6, this says million pounds of reparations. I thought it was pounds. But anyway, it's a boatload of money. So Ebert inherits a government in complete sort of political chaos, but also its full economic chaos. In massive war debt as it is, unable to pay pensions, military pensions, and now also owing reparations. And the reparations payments were so large, they were almost Germany's entire gross domestic product, almost their entire national turnover year on year. Okay? Initially. It did change. But it's sort of like you're in a position of, you take out a payday loan, let's say, okay, and the interest on the payday loan is so high that actually you can't pay your mortgage. So you have to start making choices. Do you pay off the payday loan or do you pay your mortgage for that month? And that's sort of the position that Germany is constantly in. So when we look at what's going on, so Ebert was not involved in drawing up the treaty. In fact, no Germans were. Germany wasn't allowed to attend the conference in which the treaty was written. Some Germans said that Ebert should have refused to sign such an unfair treaty. He wasn't really left a choice, to be fair. If he hadn't signed it, the Allies would have restarted the war and invaded Germany. Okay? Germany would have been completely defeated if he hadn't signed it. And all the work to set up a new republic would have been completely destroyed. So Ebert felt he had no choice, but of course, because he's the one who signs it, he gets the I still find it amazing how the Kaiser and the Kaiserreich avoid the blame of possible. It's just that. Germans blamed Ebert and the Weimar Republic for the treaty. So Hitler already had a huge arsenal of weaponry to talk about why the Weimar government was useless. Why do we need to get rid of it? But the reality is most workers stayed loyal to the SPD. Okay, the SPD remained the most popular party right up to the time that Hitler is nominated as president. Fourth challenge, sorting out the problem of money. The Weimar Republic inherited massive war debts that the Weimar Republic was responsible for dealing with them, even though they were the Kaisers. Okay. Add to that the 6.6 billion marks worth of reparations. Now, here's what happened. Germany, in 1923, is beginning to default on the reparations payments. They can't continue to make those payments. The French and the Belgians were in part counting on those payments, but mostly were really pissed once they stopped. So they decide to invade. So the French and Belgian armies invade the Ruhr. Okay? R-U-H-R, 1923. Called the Ruhr Invasion. R-U-H-R. R-U-H-R. It's put the umlaut over. Because I don't think this details. Oh, no, it does. Okay. Yeah, the umlaut is the two. French troops move in to take what is owed. Okay, so they invade the Ruhr. Now, that region is an industrial center. Okay? Large number of factories. Ebert called for passive resistance. The workers again supported the president, and they went on strike. They refused to cooperate with the French, and over 100 German workers are killed in demonstrations. But here's where Ebert makes a major mistake. He agrees to continue to pay the workers as they're on strike. He feels they deserve the support of the government, right? Passive resistance. The French and the Belgians decide that they're just going to raid factories and they're just going to start taking stuff in order to, take payment. But this is sort of like being a loan shark and breaking someone's leg with it. And you can break their leg, are they going to be able to continue to work in order to get the money that you need? Struggle with it. Start with something small. Really important. Quite as painful, but it's still something. Okay? So that's sort of what the French and Belgians do. They go into the heart of German industry and they tear it apart. How are the Germans going to be paying your war reparations now? So the government continues to pay workers. But in order to keep that up and start repaying the reparations again, the only answer is to print more money. What happens when you print more money? It's valuable. Okay? Most countries in the world at that point were still on what's called the gold standard. Okay? Gold standard means that if this was a bar of gold, okay, and this classroom were my country, and I printed 100 notes, those 100 notes would add up the total value of this bar of gold. If I print 200 notes, they're worth half as much, because they still only equal the total value of this gold that I've got. Does that make sense? So if you keep printing money, you reduce its actual worth, its actual value. So they print more money to restart the reparations payments. And first, it works. something you can't stop. You're printing more money, and more money, and more money, and its value plummets. By the end of 1923, okay, in August of 1923, a loaf of bread cost about 0.6 marks. 1923. It's called the hyperinflation crisis. Okay? A loaf of bread cost 0.6 marks. 60p, actually. By November, a loaf of bread cost 1.5 million marks. A loaf of bread. I think it tops out over 2 million marks. Okay? It gets to the point that people got paid twice a day. You get paid at lunchtime and you go shopping immediately. Because if you waited till the end of the day, the money you got at lunchtime would be worthless. Imagine you saved your entire life. Think about the bank accounts you have right now. You had 30,000 marks in the bank. Over the course of 2 months, that 30,000 marks, which you scrimped and saved your entire life, will no longer buy you a loaf of bread. Hyperinflation crisis wipes out. And think about inflation over recent years. What's the inflation rate in this country right now? Over the past couple of years, it's averaged between 3 and 5%. Okay? The salary's gone up now. In the past 4 years, salaries in this country have effectively declined by anywhere from 10 to 20%. Inflation has gone up. Salaries haven't gone up fast enough to meet it. Okay? 1.9% is what I have in the past 5 years. Okay? In that time, my pension has gone up 40 times a month. It goes 3%, not 1.9%. It's going and then some. Pension's gone up. Okay? And everybody eats the profit. Think about hyperinflation like this. Civil servant salaries didn't go up to match hyperinflation. The middle class was suddenly earning nothing. Their yearly salary was barely keeping them. Okay? So hyperinflation was a massive problem. It got to the point, okay, in 1921, 1 pound was worth 500 marks. By 1923, 1 pound was worth 14 billion marks. Okay? And many people blamed Ebert and his government for the crisis, which, to be fair, only lasted a couple of months. Somebody comes in and rescues it. But that image, I think, says everything. It was cheaper to let the kids use bundles of cash as building blocks than to actually buy building blocks. Okay? People wallpapered their homes with money because it was cheaper than buying the wallpaper. In early 1924, a guy by the name of Gustav Stresemann is appointed Chancellor of Germany. He persuaded Ebert to use his emergency powers from Article 48 to scrap the mark, get rid of it. He introduces a whole new currency, the rented mark, and strictly controls the printing of it. It's the only way out of this problem. Stresemann, in his first 100 days as Chancellor, achieves arguably more than any Chancellor that preceded. Okay. At this point, the U.S. also came in to Germany's rescue in the form of loans. Okay, private and bank loans. The U.S. in the 1920s is in the middle of what's referred to as the Roaring '20s. huge industrial and financial boom. And they were looking for places to invest money. Why not invest in Germany? Right? It's a sound investment. Coming in with the country's, in tatters, help them rebuild their industry. It's a solid investment. So as part of that, it's what's called the Dawes Plan. Occurs that signed in 1924. Americans loaned 800 million marks. I apologize, actually, I believe it's $800 million. Okay. And then we end up in what's commonly referred to as the golden years, the Weimar Republic, with a huge influx of cash from Americans. Germany has an economic recovery after the by 1924, mid-1924. German economy is well. Unemployment is way down. Right? And the economy overall is on the rise. Okay? Between 1924 and 1929, there were several peaceful elections. Okay? Most Germans voted for parties that supported the government. The traditional elites, the civil service and the army, cooperated with the government. Gustav Stresemann, no longer chancellor. He's only allowed to be chancellor for a short period of time. Once the financial crisis is over, he's appointed foreign minister. But he has a great deal of influence as foreign minister because he has a lot of international perspective. So Stresemann still has a great deal of influence. He's the one who secures the loans to the United States. He's the one who, in part because of his work as foreign minister, Germany is actually in 1925 decided to join the League of Nations. In 1925, there were elections for the post of president. Paul von Hindenburg wins. Okay, former military hero, so that looks good. That, a former leader of the military is now the president, so the army is quite happy about that because he's an icon. Hindenburg actually runs against Hitler for the presidency. Hitler travels all over the country. Hindenburg is pretty old by that point, so he doesn't run. The continuing problem is that of proportional representation. Proportional representation is designed to no one political party rules the country. They have to form coalitions. It's designed to force parties to compromise. They didn't like working with each other, and they didn't play nice. The longest government only lasted for 2 years. So there's still a great deal of political instability. Wouldn't you get upset if every couple of months you were having to go elect a new government? You would quickly get the feeling like this isn't working. Okay? And when Hitler comes to power, that's exactly what happens. Every 6 months, a new election, parliament's being dissolved, and there's new elections. People get really frustrated with it, and turnout gets lower and lower each time. I'm not going to bother. Okay. So parties did form coalitions, but they weren't being cooperative. When we look at the political parties that existed, sorry, I forgot to scroll through this. There we go. Okay. These are the political parties of the Weimar Republic. From left to right, they follow the political spectrum here. So on the left, you've got the Communist Party, the KPD. They wanted to overthrow the Republic. Now, yeah, just this top part. We don't need to write down how many votes they got. We'll talk about that in a second. But so from left to right, we've got the Communist Party wanted to overthrow the government. Then you've got the SPD, the Democratic Party, and Center and Catholic parties, which generally supported the government. Okay. And you've got the Conservative Party. Conservative, who do they support? Workers or big business? Big business owners, right? Supported by industrialists. They didn't support the government. Then you had nationalists, supported by large landowners. Again, wealthy. And when we think nationalists, again, they're pretty far right, not as far as pretty far right wing. They're also xenophobic. Yeah, pure foreigners. Okay, they're being like nationalist Republicans. Quite as far as EDL, but not far off. And then you had the Nazis, the National Socialist Democratic Party. The bit that's going to be difficult for you to wrap your brains around. That they're right wing, but they're socialist. Ultra conservative though about ultra conservative in terms of racial. By the time Hitler comes to power, they okay. Now, what's interesting here is that during this period, okay, if we look at the votes for the SPD, except for the blip in May 1924 when people are still upset about the hyperinflation, okay, but look at 1924. When the economy goes in crisis, which two parties get all of the votes that the SPD had lost? Which two parties grow in 1924 when the SPD lost votes? The two extreme parties. In the time of economic crisis, people look to extreme parties. Think about that now in the UK. We're not in full-blown economic crisis anymore, but we're in a serious economic downturn, arguably the largest still since the Great Depression, and the longest lasting. UKIP suddenly has become a major party. Okay? BNP has grown. When people start looking. People want somebody to blame. Right now, they blame European immigration. Okay? As historically always happens, they're blaming the wrong people. But that's who they're blaming. By December 1924, though, people have pulled out of those parties. Communist Party loses a little bit. The Nazis lose a lot. Okay? And they go back to the SPD. And the economy's recovering. You're like, all right, that's cool. By 1928, the Nazis are barely getting anything, and the SPD is doing really well again. Okay? So are the nationalists. So the two largest parties, these guys hate each other. But luckily, you still got the Center Party there. Okay, so they can form a coalition. In general, during this period, referred to as the golden years or the stress period, Germany's doing really well. I'm going to skip over that for now. Is the economy stable? The answer is sort of yes. In the late 1920s, if you walk down the street of Berlin, okay, there's a lot to see. Cafes were full. Berlin becomes the pleasure capital of Europe, the sort of Amsterdam of Europe today. Architects were creating new exciting buildings, films were being made, okay? Entertainment industries were doing well, and that's always a sign that the economy is doing reasonably well. Okay? It's clearly recovering from the economic crisis of 1923, and in part because the Dawes Plan of 1924, right? That stressed and organized. Germany was helped by the 800 million, I'm sure it's dollars, this says marks, but I have it mine as dollars, that the U.S. Gives loans to Germany. That stimulates the investment in business and growth in business. So there's this illusion of economic stability based on those 800 million dollars worth of loans. So big businesses like chemicals and steels did well, so the big cities where these industries were based did well. But what happened when the prosperity of a city is based on one key industry? What happens when that industry starts to struggle? You can think pretty locally, you think of a couple of major examples of that, right? In Hampton, Corby. What happens when the steel industry goes under? Corby ends up in an economic downturn that lasts 30 years. They're only just pulling out of now. Detroit is the best example in the U.S., a whole city. It's dependent on the automobile industry. Start moving the automobile industry out to Mexico, out to China. Okay, Germany's recovery was totally dependent on American loans. The loans were short period loans. They could be recalled at any time. And this was sort of like taking an interest-only mortgage. You know what an interest-only mortgage is? That's it, right? You buy a house, take out an interest-only mortgage, and all you're paying is the interest. That kind of thinking is what's caused the current economic crisis. That Americans, eternally optimistic, would take out and buy massive properties in places like California, Florida, that they could barely afford to pay on an interest-only loan. Because the bank told them they could afford it. So they took it out. And the interest bumps up, they can't afford to pay it back. And actually, they haven't paid any of the capital, any of the actual loan. So once property values started to drop, people still owed, $500,000 on a house that was suddenly only worth $300,000. Does that make sense? Okay. So they had to foreclose. So property values down even further. Huge economic crisis. Right? Sort of what's going on here. These were loans that Americans could call back at any time. What do we know is coming? The Great Depression hits in December 1929. What do you think Americans do to that $800 million worth of loans? Have to call it right back in. So Germany is immediately affected by the Great Depression in the United States. That's why Hitler comes to power. Okay. Skip over the front. Yeah. Okay. During the Weimar Republic, small businesses still suffered because they didn't get any of that stimulation of American loans. People didn't come and invest in small businesses. They came and invested in big ones. So they struggled to compete. The wages of people working in public services didn't go up as fast as people working in industry because the investment was in industry. So civil servants like teachers didn't see that benefit. So they weren't all that happy. Boom. And felt bitter. Felt left out. As you might expect. Use my brother as an example for this. Because when I was trudging through university and flipping burgers to pay university fees, my brother said, he used to love making fun of me. talking about how much money he was working on it, and full of regret actually. And he was making maybe like making decent money. So he used to ultimately want to have me here on this one university and do something. Okay. If we look at the real wages of people during this period, so if we look at 1925, that's 100%. Okay. Weekly wages in 1924 only 80% of that value, and they continue to rise. By 1928, many people were earning 110% of what they were earning in 1920. Okay? So real wages were on a steady increase. Industrial production. Why do we have a blip there in 1923? Yeah. Okay. The hyperinflation and the Ruhr invasion. Okay, so huge blip. But then after that, woohoo! If production looked like that all the time, then that's the economy we need to do. Okay? Don't be worried about this blip. Some of it. I'll run through it very, very quickly. Sorry. Stresemann was a foreign affairs expert. Okay, he built good relations with Germany's foreign enemies. By 1925, he signs the Locarno Treaty, okay, which is a pact between Germany, France, and Belgium. Okay, basically agreeing that those borders are concrete, never going to change until 1921. But we're never going to change. The issue is that Czechoslovakia was left feeling, and Poland were left feeling a bit nervous about that because their borders were never discussed in that treaty. In 1926, Germany is invited to join the League of Nations. The League of Nations was the predecessor to the UN treaty. Okay? It failed for a number of reasons, in part because the U.S. was never a member. But it was the first kind of international organization whose goal was to maintain peace. Germany, a country that had accepted playing for World War I, 7 years later, is invited to join. That's a big deal, and that's around the work of Stresemann. Okay, Stresemann agreed the Young Plan with the United States, which reduced Germany's reparation payments and spread out the payments to make them easier to afford. Okay, Young Plan signs early 1929. Okay. And that's the one that spread the payments out over a really long period of time. They were due to be paid off sometime in the 1980s or 90s. Okay. So for years, so that it was a manageable payment. Okay. That's good for Germany. Boosts the economy, reduces payments. It's like remortgaging your house to reduce the payments and lower the interest. It's a good deal. Why wouldn't you do it? But some extremist groups, including Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party, accused Stresemann of being a traitor for cooperating with Britain and France. You're cooperating with the countries that forced us to sign the Treaty of Versailles, the greatest embarrassment in German history, blah, blah, blah. This political cartoon, I think. And it's hard to read, but actually here, if you look on the screen, that says England. So these other students, here's England, that's Poland, France, Italy. Okay, so these are the good children in class. And the teacher, the League of Nations. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I love fluid. I could teach a whole lesson on the interpretation of fluid. Um, don't even know who Dr. Seuss? You know Dr. Seuss, yeah. Theodore Geisel. He was actually a political cartoonist. Well, that's what he started out with. And I actually have a book called Dr. Seuss Goes to War, his political cartoons leading up to the Second World War about American isolation. Um, and it's really interesting. Okay, that's the that's the Weimar Republic after this period. Okay, the big issue, the thing that you need to remember, and have to just hold in your head, is that what happened when the Great Depression hits the United States, the immediate economic crisis in Germany. At that point, the SPD is refusing to work within a coalition, leaving no choice but to appoint Hitler as chancellor, try to get the Nazi Party into the coalition. It works at the then Hitler finds ways to establish balance. For one thing, he burns down the Reichstag and brings the Reichstag fire. 1-0. Okay? So next week we're going to look at the kind of step-by-step process of how Hitler establishes power. Okay? Went on longer than I wanted to, I'm sorry. But I want to leave you the kind of remaining time to meet with your groups about the sociology project. Okay? Look at where you are, what you need to do outside of this lesson for next week.